Welcome to Chris and Jen in the Morning.
Where it's always morning somewhere.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Jen.
We are in rare form today.
In rare form. So excited to have you here with us today.
Yes, welcome back.
Welcome back. It's been a hilarious trip to get here today. Which
we've gone on many journeys to get
adventures.
To this.
Many adventures. So be sure to watch the outtakes. But I'm so excited actually for our conversation today. We're going to talk about imposter syndrome, which is something, Chris, that you and I have been talking about for years together. So this is us inviting you in to our conversation, our ongoing conversation about a topic that is super relevant to both of us and probably to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to say we're probably pretty average when it comes to dealing with imposter syndrome, like as in normal.
The safe bet.
Yeah. But before we get there, let's do our gratitude moment. And
yes,
Chris, do you want me to kick us off or do you want to go first?
You go for it.
All right. Well, I wanted to take a minute and just express my incredibly deep gratitude for you guys, the people who are listening to our conversations and joining in. We had somebody reach out to us this week and they sent this just incredibly beautiful note about how they were experiencing some of the same feelings of anxiety that we expressed before going to an event that we recently went to. And I just felt like so grateful that this person reached out and shared their feelings, helping to kind of normalize what we were sharing. I know when we talked about how I was feeling before the Pride Kelso event, I remember going, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're talking about this and exposing me in front of everybody. That this is really vulnerable. And so just to know that vulnerability was seen and appreciated and it meant something, and to be reminded, even though we know that we are not alone in these feelings, to be reminded that, we're not weird. We're just normal people trying to make it through life. I have a ton of gratitude for that. So I'm so excited for the friendships and relationships that we get to build through doing this, and just super grateful for the interaction that we have with you all as you reach out and let us know what you think. So just, who you are. You reached out and shared some stuff, and I'm super excited to get a chance to actually meet with you. But just thank you. I'm very grateful for you.
Yeah. I mean, my gratitude moment is right along those same lines, which we don't usually tell each other what our gratitude moments are. We keep those to ourselves until we're in the moment. So big surprise, you and I are having a moment of gratitude around the same thing. But I think it does go back to that vulnerability piece, because I think when we started this, there was this, we did not necessarily feel totally comfortable in jumping in, and as we have gone on, we've gotten more comfortable. We are willing to share a little bit more. And I don't know, I think finding that comfortability and then getting responses from people who see that authenticity and can connect with it, I think is really encouraging and helps us continue to do this. Yesterday, I had gone out with a friend. We were going to try to join one of the No Kings marches here in the city. We did not make it out of the door in time, but he had made some pins for us to wear on our shirts. And so we had gone out and someone had seen the pin and started talking with me and had brought up a podcast that they were listening to where they were talking about the No Kings marches. And so we struck up a conversation with them, and I was like, oh, well, me and a friend actually have a podcast as well. And they're a huge podcast person. So they're like, oh my gosh, what is the podcast? I want to listen to it. What is it about? And I just shared, we have real conversations about life, how we live it, seeking joy, seeking happiness in this world, as sometimes it's not always easy to find those things. And then also self-care, laughs, all of the things. And even having not listened to our content, just the conversation that we had together, their name is Angel. So shout out to Angel. They really encouraged me to continue, because I had told them we had just started in February. We were still, getting our groove, and they were just really encouraging about it. And so I think whenever we hear those things, it's just that encouragement that helps us okay, we can do this. We are getting comfortable, and every recording is a new opportunity to connect with someone else in a different way, and I think we both are very excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that ties right into what we're going to talk about today because, I think both of us with our careers have experienced imposter syndrome. I think we've both talked about it. I know I have in a social setting as well. Absolutely. When it came to starting this podcast, it was like, well, like what right like who do we think we are starting a podcast? Like why would anyone want to listen to us? What do we have to offer? And that like voice that's in there going, why do you think you're good enough to do this?
Yeah.
And for me, that is how imposter syndrome shows up most often. It's just
Yeah.
this like, why do you think you're good enough for that? I don't know if that's, how it shows up for you, but that's absolutely the kind of feeling and question that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, for me, it comes more into like situations that I'm not super familiar with. And like it's almost like self-doubt that kind of creeps in. And it's not just about like, do I deserve this? It's can I do this? And am I able to do this? And do I have those skills? And I think like that plays in exactly to as we were getting started with this podcast. It was
Yeah.
very much so like, yeah, we listen to them, we enjoy having conversations together, but that doesn't always make for great content. And so, we have figured it out as we've gone along, but it's definitely for me it like creeps in, and it's very, now that I know about it and I can identify it, like it does make it easier to try to like pull myself back whenever I'm starting down that path. But yeah, it starts off a very small voice, if you will, and just kind of gets like louder and louder and louder, and till I'm like in a full blown, you know, panic.
Yeah, it's so interesting because this is something that I really struggle with, having imposter syndrome, like just quite often. I'll talk to people about it and they'll say, but Jen, you're so confident. Like, no, you're so confident. I'll just be going like, I don't know how you're getting that because
Yeah.
what I'm feeling like on the inside is like just why do I deserve to be here? I'm not good enough for this. Everybody's gonna like once they really see, they're gonna realize. And I remember when I started my last job, so back in 2022, um, I remember really just this like irrational, deep fear that as soon as they really got to know me, they were gonna go, "Oh, you weren't quite what I thought I was getting." And it's so funny because it's not like I necessarily doubted my like when I'm convicted, I have a strong conviction or belief in how something should be done. I have no trouble advocating for that, but I don't really see that as confidence so much as like passion. When I stop and think about like myself in general, it's like this constant fear of falling short
Yeah.
and this struggle to believe in what you really are capable of, not in a logical or cognitive way, more in that emotional kind of way. And that it
Yeah.
all comes back to self worth, which I know we talk about a lot. For me, anyways. I don't know for you if that's what you experience, but for me, it comes back to this like sense of self worth and this like belief that, really I'm not going to be as good as what I think. And when I start to think that really I am good, that's, like, that's when ego gets the best of you. And it really is
Yeah.
this like confusion of what ego really is and
Right.
how can ego and confidence coexist with each other. It's like it's gotten kind of confused and jumbled up.
Yeah. I do think what's super interesting about imposter syndrome, um, it was first coined in 1978 by these two psychologists, Pauline Rose Clancy, I think that's how you say her last name, and Suzanne Imes. And what they were actually studying was this idea of imposter phenomenon in high achieving women. So like they specifically were looking into what is it about these women who are high achievers, who do have high expectations of themselves and also have like moved themselves forward in careers and in life and all of those things. And so that it was in that paper where they talk about imposter syndrome being the persistent belief that you're not as competent as others think, despite evidence of your abilities. And I do think that a lot of
Yeah.
that goes back to what we think our self-worth is. What do we bring to the table? And that's all like developed based on all the messages that we've received through our life, and having to find the balance in those messages, which ones are right and correct versus which ones were because I made someone potentially feel uncomfortable or because I was taking up too much space, as we've discussed before. Like all of those messages that come at us are things that either help build us up or tear us down. And you
Yeah.
have to find balance.
And it's so interesting. It's interesting that, you talk about these messages like from way back that I think sometimes we don't even think about. So I mentioned to you before we started, I was back home over the weekend, and there was this box of or a couple mixed up boxes of memories, and I was reading through some of like the papers and stuff that I had written, and one of them was this like we had to write a biography of ourselves.
Mhm.
And so I was in middle school. Oh, I think maybe 8th grade or something is like the context of what I was reading. And I had written like all the way from being a child all the way up like a chapter. And I mean, as an 8th grader, I was still a child, you know. And I had written about my experience in 3rd grade, and it was really interesting because I remember that experience, but it was really interesting to read that through my 8th grade self eyes. And when I was in 3rd grade, I had switched schools, and I had this teacher who was fired the next year. She was just really awful. And I remember when I first started, my mom had gone and talked to her about like needing to challenge me and not giving like spelling words that were even at a 3rd grade level. They were below a 3rd grade level. And I don't think my teacher was very happy about that. And so she, for the whole year, proceeded to do things like pull me up in front of the classroom and tell the entire class that I was dumb and stupid and no one would ever like me. And her
That's
daughter would come
horrible.
into class after school and she would tell the class that her daughter didn't like me and just all of these things. And when you think about it, like I kind of go, is that real? Like that just seems so surreal. Who would do that?
Right.
But, as we talk about imposter syndrome and the messages that you have, like, even though cognitively, I know that, that wasn't really about me at all as a 3rd grader. And then, all through my childhood growing up, like, that's a voice that I've had to contend with. And just
Yeah.
reading that story and thinking about that, I can feel those feelings sit heavy on my chest, like they still impact me today. So what I think is so interesting is talk about being vulnerable like that. That was a really vulnerable thing to share. But I think the reason I choose to share that is it's like those things that can all add up over time. And then when you're in a moment of vulnerability and you start to question, it's those things that still are within you that start to sit heavy on your chest and the
Right.
little voices start to chirp in your head. And it's sometimes not even about what you're actually thinking, it's that feeling that sits heavy
Correct.
on your chest. At least for me, it sits right here.
Yeah. And we talked earlier this week about how, like, you can go through a day and then all of a sudden you're like, back in a situation
Yeah,
that happened, years ago.
yeah,
And, anything can bring those things up. It can be a smell, it can be like seeing someone, it can be seeing a piece of clothing. It could even be someone saying something to you that then automatically like takes you back to that place. And yes, we may have like processed those words that were once spoken at us, and we can say all day long, well, I don't accept that, that is not who I am. But that does not mean in moments where we feel like those messages are being reinforced today,
yeah.
it doesn't find a way to like worm its way in and bring up that self-doubt. It's hard. Like it's hard because your emotions start to take over and we start to have these reactions that necessarily we don't want to start taking over
Yeah,
our bodies and our minds.
I'm absolutely certain that my therapist would say that I, as who I am now, should visualize myself going back and comforting that younger version of myself. And I probably would make some, you know, ew face and say, I don't want to do that. I don't know why that's the reaction that I would have, but I have started to understand the science behind doing that, going back and like really reframing the way that your body codes that memory, and that like what happens is you have these memories that are coded not just in like a visual movie like picture of what happened. It's not just like facts, just the facts. It's oftentimes memories are coded in the other senses that you have. And so your brain actually sends these signals of like feelings into your body. So going back and comforting your younger self can help reframe the way that your body codes that memory, so that
Yeah.
when there are things that ping that memory, that come in and say, we've been here before. Here's the way that you should feel. Here's how you should prepare or engage the amygdala or whatever part of the brain that's going to come in and help protect us. You can really teach your body how to recode that response to the reaction, which is really interesting. Some people do that through like there's the EMDR, like the rapid eye movement.
Oh, yeah.
There's like color therapy that gets at that. And like, we won't get into the science of all of that today. But just interesting to think about, like, where does imposter syndrome come from? And I think for many people, it comes from different places. But for a lot of people, I think it's rooted in memories that may not be related to the situation, but that are related to how you inform yourself, even
Yeah.
subconsciously, about who you are and what you deserve.
Which is also just so interesting because even like if you were to tell me a story about how someone like maybe said something to you that made you feel a certain way, like I would likely try and build you up. Like I
Hmm.
would, and as a close friend, like I want you to be happy. I want you to have success. I want you to have all those things. And I'm going to challenge, whatever someone said to you. Um, and it's like even though we have that, and we have those people in our lives who will help speak those things over us. We had, if depending on how you were raised, like my family always spoke positivity. If you said something mean or bad about yourself, you then had to say three nice things. Like it's all of that stuff, but that
We do that
doesn't.
here in this house. I like that
Right.
rule.
But it doesn't
It doesn't,
stop it, right?
yeah.
It doesn't stop that then emotional cyclone, if you will, that you go through. And I
Yeah.
think it's how we're coded, and it takes time to retrain your brain, um and be patient with yourself.
Yeah, and I don't think it's, anytime anyone ever said anything bad or ugly about you, it like becomes super impactful. I think this was a really impactful thing for me,
Right.
probably because I was new at the school. I already was feeling vulnerable. This was an authority figure, and this happened for the entire school year. It was like very publicly shaming. It was, I mean, I just am still intellectually perplexed about how this went on.
Yeah.
And then, the next year somebody reported her and she was fired. I think I hadn't realized until I knew that that was always something that, it happened that bothered me, but I hadn't realized until I reread that story through my 8th grade self's eyes. That probably is something that is really informing me, like physiologically, about
Yeah.
how I feel in these scenarios. I think we've gotten ahead of ourselves and didn't really define imposter syndrome. Do you want to do you want to start by defining what it is?
Well, so like I said, it was originally coined in this study that was specifically about this imposter phenomenon by high achieving women. It has come to be found to have impact beyond that. Like communities are being lumped in, doesn't seem like the right way to say that, but more people are experiencing this, not just women. And again, it's this idea, a persistent belief that you're not competent as others think despite evidence of your abilities. So there are like hard facts to be able to say you can do this, you are able to do this, you are successful, like all of those things. Yet we still get into this space of, oh my gosh, can I do this?
Yeah. And I think a big part of it is that this belief that one's accomplishments are not deserved. That if you did have successes, which are sometimes hard to logically argue with, that you weren't deserving of those successes. They happened by mistake. They were somebody else's in part doing. Recently, we talked about being comfortable with the space that you take up as 2 weeks ago. And I think imposter syndrome is related to that. If you're struggling to be comfortable with the space that you take up, imposter syndrome might be one of the reasons that you're struggling with that, and it can show
Yeah.
up in some of the same ways that we talked about with, you know, giving credit to everybody else for your accomplishments, or thinking that it's a fluke, or being afraid to fully own it, or kind of making yourself smaller as you enter a room, or just waiting for people to realize that you're not as much as what they thought you were because you don't really deserve it.
Yeah. I mean, these studies have gone far beyond what they were originally, um, created for. So the original study here was initially on high achieving women was
Mhm.
their test subjects, but as time has progressed, they have found it to be common in anyone who's considered a high achiever, underrepresented groups. And the one that I think is most interesting, because I do think it's something that all of us, no matter where we are, where we've been, it's in these transitional moments. So whenever you're starting a new school, whenever you're starting a new job, whenever you're starting to volunteer somewhere for the first time, like it's any of those things or those places where you may be in this moment of transition, these things can creep in and start to cause you to question your abilities and your worth that you can bring either to what you're working on or to the space that you're taking up, all of those things. And to me, I found that part interesting because just about all of us have been there in some form or fashion.
Yeah. Now, not everyone battles imposter syndrome, but if you do, here's the neuroscience behind what's going on. Your amygdala, which is that fear center that kind of responds when there's a threat, and the anterior cingulate cortex, that ACC that we've talked about before.
Ah, yes, the
The
ACC.
ACC, they activate during moments of uncertainty, and they prime us for this threat response that happens. And the brain treats new challenges like potential danger. We talked last week about how our brains are not wired for constant happiness. They're wired to like identify threats, survival of the fittest, right? And so the brain treats these new challenges like potential dangers, and that leads to this, who am I to do this, sort of a reflex. And so you switch, like the default mode network comes into play, which I know we've talked about before as well. And that's when the brain is not focused outward, it reverts to this self referential thinking. And that includes, all the doubts that you have inside your head. So, just a little bit of the neuroscience behind what's going on with imposter syndrome, and like what parts of the brain are getting engaged. We've talked about amygdala hijack, but there are a lot of things that you can do to actually avoid going fully into amygdala hijack. And one of the biggest ways that I think we can control the amygdala and keep it from, overreacting to things that are going on is awareness, like just creating
Yeah.
awareness, having awareness, tuning into yourself, realizing like, what do I start to feel like? And not that I'm judging myself for that, 'cause it's not wrong, but it kind of gives you some cues to maybe I need to take a step back. Maybe I need to take a breath. I'm starting to get escalated. How do I calm that down?
Yeah.
Is this really a threat? What's been your experience with that?
I think now that I better understand where these feelings are coming from and kind of what puts me into this space, I am able to better control it. I think I wish my speed to realizing those was a little bit faster so that I wouldn't get as far down the reactions, because then you have to pull yourself back, right? But I consider it a win whenever I do notice it and whenever I can start to put my plan in place of, okay, let's back up from this. It is not that big. It is not that scary. We can do this. but I love how you said it's about that awareness, being aware that these are the things, and you have to find those are going to be different for everyone. Increased heart rate, maybe you start sweating, like hard to
Sometimes
catch your breath.
I can't name exactly how it is that I am feeling because I'm kind of disassociated from
Yeah.
my feeling. But what I do know is that I feel uncomfortable. And so when I start to feel uncomfortable, that's a sign for me that like, okay, what's going on here? Like, is this something physical that's causing this? Am I getting elevated? Um, there's you can do deep breathing
Yeah.
techniques, the 6-second rule that helps you calm your body's stress response, where you just kind of take 6 seconds to pause. And then once you calm down, you then start to think about naming your specific emotions and shifting from reaction to reflection. So when we talk about like feel, pause, plan, act, that doesn't have to be like a long drawn out
Yeah.
sort of a framework. Like it can be, all kind of happening in real time. But you go, oh wait, I'm checking in to how I'm feeling. I'm feeling uncomfortable. Okay, let me take a 6-second pause here. Just breathe for a minute, get my, collect myself again, and then kind of switch into reflection, which actually uses a different part of your brain. And
Correct.
we've talked about that in the past too, right? This threat response engages one part of your brain, but reflection engages a different part of your brain that kind of has more logic coming into play. And then you can, get a better sense of what's going on and how am I responding? How am I reacting? When I think about imposter syndrome, I don't really think about the amygdala as much coming into play because usually this is all something that's happening within myself. So I'm not really responding to somebody else. But, as we talk about this and as we prepared for this, kind of made me start thinking about, oh, like, am I getting a bit of that like same interaction that's going on? It's just all happening internally. And so it's a little harder for me um, to like understand that that's what's
Right.
happening.
Well, because it's the external threats that we're used to talking,
Mhm.
like that's where we attach that value to. And
Yeah.
so but understanding like where these things are coming from can like it jumpstarts the brain to start operating how it should, and in the areas that like you start to feel uncomfortable. When you are
Yeah.
uncomfortable, what are the reasons for that, and what do we have to do to protect ourselves? And like it just like your body just starts, it's hardwired that way. So having that awareness to really pull it back. I think something that's really important to remember is that imposter syndrome isn't proof that you don't belong. It's proof that your brain is responding to potential growth opportunities, and maybe it is experiencing and acting upon this potential of threat because it's potentially something new that you're experiencing.
Yeah. So, okay, we know about imposter syndrome. And Chris, you and I have been talking about this. And,
Well,
you
it's
know,
kind of like what started the conversation this
yeah.
week was like we know that this is imposter syndrome. Like we were going back and forth about something, and both of us were like, we know this is imposter syndrome. What like
Why
why
do we
is this
keep,
still happening?
yeah, why do we keep getting caught up in it? What's up with that?
Right. So there is emotional and social layers that come into play in these things. So, you know, it keeps the imposter syndrome alive within us. And as much as we would love to be able to say like, "Oh, I know what imposter syndrome is. I know that it's not real. I'm not going to acknowledge it, and it's not going to be a problem for me anymore." Ugh, if it were only that simple.
If it were only that simple.
um but there is like this cognitive and emotional gap when it comes to being aware of like imposter syndrome and when it kicks in.
Oh, I am well aware of the cognitive and emotional gap. That is something that for me is like very real. I struggle with that cognitive and emotional gap constantly related to imposter syndrome or pretty much anything else. As my therapist would say, I really like to live more in the intellectual realm of my
Yeah.
being versus that emotional realm. Not to say that I am not empathetic, because I certainly am, but checking in with myself about how I'm feeling can get a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So instead I go back to what am I thinking instead of how I'm feeling. So this cognitive versus emotional gap for me is really real. because it's not super comfortable to address the feeling part. It's much more comfortable for me to address the thinking part.
Yeah.
But I'm going, why? I know these things aren't true, and yet I still feel this way. Why do I feel this way? And how many sessions do I have to sit in before I am fixed?
Right. How many affirmations do I have to say? How much deep breathing do I have to do?
How many
How
yoga classes do I need to take? No matter how many times I ask the question, it's still not the answer.
Right. But again, like whenever we go when as you were saying earlier, it's that awareness of these things
Mhm.
that happen. And so if you already know that you are someone who struggles with imposter syndrome, like you may get more comfortable in one situation and so you feel like it begins to deplete and go away. But then you may go into another situation where all of a sudden all of those feelings are back and accounted for and oh my gosh, where did this come from? I thought we had this under control. It's
Yeah.
just it's the response. It's our bodies responding to this years of patterning or systemic messages. And I think that's a big thing as well to be aware of. Like, what are you taking in? What content are you reviewing and listening to and watching? And what are the messages that it's sending to you? Because those things, whether negative, positive, maybe even neutral, they can get in and start to create this version of you that you're not even aware is being created.
Yeah. So for me, the cognitive versus emotional gap is probably, one of the big whys that I keep getting caught in imposter syndrome. For others, it might be social comparison. So online culture amplifies the highlight reels, not the struggles, right? I remember a good dear friend of mine saying to me many years ago at one point, like, Jen, life isn't always what it seems like on social. And what she was trying to tell me, I think, was, it may all look good what I'm putting out there, but it's really tough right now. And, this watching other people put, this unrealistic version of
Yeah.
life or experiences out there sort of subconsciously sets this expectation. And it leads to this distorted view of self measurement.
Uh-huh.
So I think being really aware of that, it doesn't mean that social media is the enemy or, any of that. But I think this is in part, Chris, why I think it's so important for us to be vulnerable and to share like the not buttoned up portions of ourselves.
Yeah.
Because, here we are talking about imposter syndrome, but like, we're just going to tell you, well, we can talk about it and understand that's where we are on this journey with you all.
Right.
And I get it wrong more than I get it right these days. So, um, work in progress here.
Well, I think it's also a big reason why whenever we went into Pride Month and we talked about like, do we want to do Pride content? And for me, it was important to put it out there because
Yeah.
I know when I was coming out, I was seeking information. I was seeking to understand. And where I grew up in my social circle at that time, I didn't have any connections in that space. And so putting stuff out there that does show what the real is and how it's not always roses and rainbows and butterflies. It's sometimes hard days. It's sometimes
Yeah.
having a lot of emotional conflict as I've shared with you. There are days that it is hard and it's acknowledging that and knowing those days are going to come.
Yeah.
But it's how we can respond to them and be aware of them so that way we can have a plan, work the plan, hopefully get back into that sunshiny day.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up because identity and representation is the third category of why we get stuck in this imposter syndrome cycle, even though we know about it. Why do we keep finding ourselves here? People from marginalized identities often face additional layers of scrutiny, and it makes feeling like a fraud so much easier to internalize. So
Yeah.
I know for you, growing up, having to kind of pretend to be somebody different than you really are, that absolutely can train how you feel about being an imposter. And especially as you go through those adolescent years, really like forming how you feel about yourself and
Yeah.
informing who you are. I think that's why at the beginning, we talked about research says that most commonly it is people who are from underrepresented groups that
Right.
often struggle more with imposter syndrome. Um, So, what are some of the ways that we can redirect and break through these moments, Chris?
So I think one of my favorites, and the first one I'm going to share, is this idea of name it to tame it. Simply saying or acknowledging, even verbally, that this is imposter syndrome. I am experiencing this in this moment. It can lessen that power over it. And I think that's why we both kind of like in the conversation we were having, once we were like, this is imposter syndrome we're talking about, we kind of laughed because it's like, here we are again talking about this thing that we thought we like not had under control, but like we know how to navigate. So,
Yeah.
and then from there, it's like it moved the conversation in a different direction, I think.
Well, and I mean, like as expressives, obviously, name it to tame it. Let's talk about it. Like that would be our natural
Yeah.
uh, way to process through our feelings.
Hence why we have a podcast.
If you're not an expressive, maybe that's not for you, or maybe it is. Maybe pushing yourself to name it out loud, even if it's just to the mirror, helps to kind of process it in a different way.
Correct.
I think one of my favorite ways is affirmations. I know I have shared, I've done this. So when I think about like the job search, for instance, I think I've shared in the past years ago, I was looking for a job. I was working, but I was looking for a job and I just was really struggling with that. Like, you go put yourself out there, you go to interviews. I remember very clearly sitting in the parking lot before going into an interview. I was driving on my way there. I was talking to you on the phone, and I must have just been a hot mess. And it must have been over lunch or something. And I don't know what it was like to be you on the other end of the phone, but what I recall for me was I was just like, why am I even doing this? They're going to hate me. Like, I'm not good enough. Why am I even here? But I know bringing all of that energy into the conversation is not going to be good. And yet, this is where I'm at. And as an expressive, what did I do? I called you and said, oh my gosh, I have to talk about this because I got a lot of energy I got to get out. And I don't remember exactly like what you shared with me during that, but I do remember that during that period of time, I had really been leaning into affirmations, and I would go on my walks in the morning and tell myself like I am competent, I am good at my job, and saying those things out loud, it's like I know them to be true, I don't feel them to be true. And
Yeah.
so saying them out loud felt really uncomfortable. And I was just waiting for like the sidewalk to come up and hit me in the face as I went on my walk and said those things. But, after repetition and forcing myself to do what was uncomfortable, it started to be that voice became less loud. It's not like it fixed it. It's not like it magically made it go away, but I was able to be more in control of the thoughts that I chose to keep
Yeah.
versus the ones that I let really control the energy that I was
Right.
bringing in to these situations.
Yeah. Whenever I don't think that this was something that I shared in the moment that day with you, but I do have in conversations with people whenever they go down that path of like worst case scenarios and this is all the bad things and this is what could happen. I have learned you find balance. So if you're saying that that's the worst case scenario, let's talk about best case scenario.
Yeah.
What are like if you're willing to give the worst case scenarios time and space in your thinking, in your conversations, in the emotions that you are giving, then be willing to look at the other side of that as well to find balance because as I've said before, it will likely the truth will likely net somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. But like that takes time. You have to be able to know that that's the path you're going down. And for me, unfortunately, I'm not quite as good as it in like my first iteration of worst case scenario. It's usually whenever I'm in my third version of worst case scenario that I'm like, wait, all I've thought about are the negatives of this so far. Okay, we gotta hold on. Why are
We
we
got to
feeling this way?
Okay, so name it to tame it, affirmations, finding balance in your worst case scenario planning. I think fourth thing, and it's something I talked about earlier that you could do to help reframe this is really identifying where are these feelings of insecurity coming from, particularly if you've got that, intellectual versus emotional gap going
Yeah.
on. And then as much as I hate saying this, going back and sitting with your younger self and comforting your younger self and telling your younger self, the things that you need to hear The things that as an adult you would tell that child
Yeah.
to correct that misinformation or comfort those feelings, because while you absolutely deserved back then to be comforted, there's nothing we can do about that. So you can go back and go inside of yourself and comfort that part of yourself that's still hanging on to those feelings, and that helps to recode the way that your memory draws
Yeah.
upon those experiences to prepare yourself for when they happen again, or when you get triggered.
Yeah. Also, something that I know that you do that we've talked about is having that, like keeping a log or the printouts or whatever of
Hmm.
wins,
Yeah.
things that reinforce the truths that you know, that you can always go back to in moments when you are feeling unsure or uncertain. So, this could be a folder that you keep in your email that's like wins, successes, positive messages. I know I used to actually print mine out and keep them in a folder in my desk so that
I
I
have a
would.
I have a box back there that has them in it. I don't know that they ever make me stop doubting myself, because really when I'm caught up in this, I'm like, "Oh, well they didn't really see the real me or the whole me or whatever." But sometimes you need to use somebody else's words when your words aren't good enough to remind
Right?
you that you're enough. You've done great things, and you will continue to do many more.
And Jen, you have done great things and you will do many, many more.
And I've
I did not
just
tell you that on that call the other day, and I should have.
I feel
So I
like
will say it
I feel
now.
so undeserving of that, but thank you. Every time you tell me that you think I'm smart, I just feel so uncomfortable, because I'm like, he doesn't know. He doesn't really. I got to folds. One day it's going to sink in, Chris.
One day it will sink in,
One
and I will
day.
be there that day, and we will celebrate it.
I love that. I love that. You can also ground yourself in community. So we talked about naming it to tame it, but one of the things that we do so often is find community in each other.
Yeah.
And I've talked about, I think it was Brene Brown who talked about when you are most vulnerable, you don't share your feelings of shame or vulnerability with everybody. You are careful who you choose to share them with,
Right.
because you are vulnerable, so you're more you need those trusted people who are going to
Right.
support you, but sometimes just sharing that with somebody else can really help you work through that. You can gain their compassion to help find the words that you can't use on your own. You can also do some deep breathing, some power poses. I love a good power pose. I have done
Right.
plenty of those as I prepare to go into a meeting that I feel like I am terrified I'm going to screw up. I will just do a little bit of power posing behind a closed door in my office where no one can laugh at me.
Safe space, safe space.
It doesn't help if there's a clear window. You got to stand in the corner behind the door where it
Yeah.
blocks you, and you just power pose, because, putting on the air of confidence sometimes helps you find the confidence that you're lacking.
Yeah. And I think another one, movement is very, I think,
Yeah.
underrated. And I don't think people initially go to that because what usually we're dealing with are emotions or thoughts. But
Yeah.
actually, when you get your body up and moving, and it begins to have to think about other things and process other things. So it does allow for a little bit more space to be created for you to help process things.
Well, movement, and particularly like getting your heart rate up and sweating, helps to release certain hormones, or kind of alleviate certain hormones
Yeah.
that are running through your body. So the way that the brain helps to, influence how you're thinking and feeling is through putting out these different hormones. And so you've got this, cortisol going through your body because you've got the amygdala responding to a threat, and it's pumping you full of this adrenaline, and the chemistry within your body is starting to change. And so one of the ways to actually process that out of your system is through exercise, through movement.
Yeah.
And I know for me, many a times I have been working from home, sitting through meetings, getting like really, really stressed out and feeling like I'm just really, really antsy. And I, being someone who, uses like shaking or movement to kind of help manage how I'm, my feelings, getting out and just going for a walk. Like, needing
Yeah.
to take my next meeting on a walk, doing something like that really helps me to then be able to come back and address something with a clearer mind. And so I didn't really understand the why behind that, but it's not just like the magic of movement. It's also, that helps your body process some of those hormones that you have going and helps to kind of rebalance your body chemistry. You're
So
also
all great things
you're
to try.
releasing good endorphins as you move and all of that too. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So all great things to try. Unfortunately, there is no magic pill. There is no workout. There is no specific number of sessions to sit through to
No,
work through this
no
imposter syndrome.
semester of yoga classes that are gonna cure you. Although yoga is another good way to train your mind and your body. But we are just constantly a work in progress, and
Yeah,
know that if this is something that you struggle with, you are not alone. We struggle with it too, and we choose not to let it control who we are and how we show up in the world, but to acknowledge it and
right.
to reframe it and put it back in its place. And when we can't do that alone, to lean on each other to do that. So
That's right.
we would love to hear from you. How do you combat imposter syndrome? And what do you think about it? So share with us, comment here. Wherever you're listening, we would love to read those and respond to those. Reach out to us via social. You can also email us at chrisjeninthemorning@gmail.com. There's no and in there. I know it's weird. chrisjeninthemorning@gmail.com. You can text us at 940-278-8129. And don't forget to follow us on social media. We're everywhere, Chris, right?
That's right. We're on the Instagram. We're on the Facebook. We're on the TikTok. We're out there. Find us. We are Chris and Jen ITM. ITM stands for in the morning. So please go out, follow, like, subscribe, all of the things, leave comments. I think recently we've put out some short content that when we were together, and let me just say it is the epitome of who we are as individuals.
Yep. Yep. Where does the drink go? Don't touch the table.
Yep. We follow direction really well on the initial ask.
Or the secondary asker. I don't know. For a finite period of time, we follow direction really well.
Correct.
Well, until next time, be kind to one another and make it a great week.
Bye, everyone. That was fun.